Today on Questions Answered, we're talking about saddles, also known as seats. And the first question is, how do I choose the right saddle? Saddles come in different widths, shapes, and materials, and each part plays a role in comfort. So let's talk about how they're made. For any saddle, there's typically a shell, and this is usually a hard plastic element. In a lot of saddles, it's built to have some flex. And there's a cover that's often has foam or gel padding with something on top, often vinyl or synthetic leather or another material, or it can be made of leather. And then every saddle has rails, and the rails can change depending on the application of the saddle. Most saddles use steel rails, but they can also be hollow to be lighter or be made of titanium or carbon fiber to make a bike lighter, as light as possible for more performance applications. Although that's not necessarily true for every saddle, because if you look at a really traditional saddle like this Brooks saddle, it doesn't actually have a shell at all. It just uses a hard leather top or cover that actually breaks in to conform to your body. So how do you pick the right saddle for yourself? Well, for upright riding, leisure bikes, comfort bikes, cruisers, a wider saddle is generally a better choice, and a more cushioned saddle is generally a better choice for those applications, because the more upright you are, the more weight you have on your saddle, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, but the shape of your hips, rather the part that contacts the saddle, changes depending on what angle your body is at. So if you're more upright, your hips are actually wider at the contact point between the saddle and your body. So a wider, more cushioned saddle is a better choice. That's also if you're not spending a lot of time on the bike. On the other end of the spectrum, if we're talking about a more forward riding position, for bikes that are more performance oriented, when you're going to be spending more time on the bike and more likely to be wearing padded shorts, a narrower, more firm saddle is a better choice. And that's because your hips are narrower at that point in which they contact the saddle. Also, you don't want to have too much padding if you're spending a lot of time on the bike, because padding can actually cut off blood flow if you're spending a long time on the saddle. And for a lot of riders, in more performance riding applications, you'll be wearing cycling shorts. So it moves the padding to the shorts where it can be positioned more optimally for your body. So then the next question is, how do I find the most comfortable saddle for me? There's no perfect saddle for everybody, but you can get close by combining good measurements with finding the right style for your application and then fine-tuning your setup. And the quickest way to do this is to get a bike fit. So you can go to a professional bike fitter, they'll measure your sit bones, and they can suggest the right shape and fine-tune that shape for you. There's also some trial and error required here, and for a lot of bike fitters during the fit, you can try out different saddles, but you can also do this on your own, not necessarily by purchasing saddles, although that is an option. A lot of bike shops offer demo saddles to try. You can take them out for a long ride or the weekend. And, comfort is going to take experimentation no matter what. You might strike gold on the first try, and maybe the stock saddle on a bike fits you great, and that can definitely happen. But you might also expect that if you're spending more time riding a bike, you might have more specific requirements for your saddle. My butt hurts. Can I adjust something? Absolutely, and that is a really common and really important part of the saddle fitting process. Just throwing a saddle on a bike is almost never enough to get it to fit you comfortably. So it all starts with your saddle height. Getting the saddle height correct is absolutely necessary. So that's ensuring that you're getting proper leg extension and that you're not sitting in an awkward position. You want basically a 35, 40 degree angle at your knee at the bottom of the pedal stroke. So then, once you have the proper saddle height, you want to adjust your saddle angle. And for most saddles, that means that you want the saddle to be level where you're sitting on the saddle. So for the application, that can change a bit. So let's say, you're on a more forward bike, like a road bike, a gravel bike, where you're in a more aggressive forward-leaning riding position. Where you actually sit on the saddle is more likely to be in the middle or towards the front of the saddle. And a lot of these WTB saddles are designed to curve up towards the back. This is a WTB Solano saddle very nice saddle. But it actually curves up towards the back to support you when you're pushing off the pedals. And the part that you actually sit on most of the time is the middle of the saddle. So that's the part that you want basically level to the ground. And that's a really good starting point. Some riders, depending on how your body is shaped and what's most comfortable to you, you want to adjust it a few degrees. If you feel like there's too much pressure on the nose of the saddle, I suggest tilting it back slightly. But I would caution against making an extreme adjustment, because that basically means that the saddle probably isn't going to work for you, or there could be another issue going on. So subtle adjustments, slightly off perfectly level, is within reason. If we're talking about a more relaxed riding application, same concept really, it's just that you will probably be riding on a different part of the saddle. With a saddle like this, that's very wide, the part that you're most likely to be riding on, rather than the middle or the nose, is most likely the wider rear part of the saddle. So it would actually probably look a little bit nose up in comparison when adjusted properly. There's also one really important question to ask yourself if you're feeling a lot of pressure on your butt, which is, do I need to be this upright? When you're riding a bike, there's pressure distributed between the various contact points of the bike. Your hands, your saddle, and your pedals as well. But if you're just cruising along, it's basically distributed between your hands on the grips and your butt on the saddle. So the more upright you are, you relieve pressure from your hands, but you move all that weight to be supported by the saddle. On the other hand, if you ride a little bit more forward and the handlebars are lower and you put more weight on the handlebars, then you actually relieve some of the pressure of the saddle. So there's always a trade-off there. You know, do you want to have all the weight on the saddle? Probably not. At least if you're looking to be most comfortable on a longer ride. On the other hand, having a ton of weight or pressure on the grips can be uncomfortable on a longer ride as well. So finding a balance there that works for you is the best way to be comfortable. What are sit bones and how do I measure them? Sit bones, or rather sits, S-I-T-Z bones, are your ischial tuberosities, and that is basically the underside of your pelvis. And I keep going like this because it's shaped like this. And then it gets thinner the more forward you go and wider the more back you go. And that's why as your pelvis rotates in various riding positions, you have different requirements for a saddle width, because the contact point changes size, or changes width, really. If you want to get measured for a saddle, you need to measure the width of your sits bones. And there's pretty easy ways to do this. And a good technique that I like to use is to use a piece of corrugated cardboard and put it on a low seat or a stool and sit on it. But make sure that you get into your riding position. So if you're on a more forward riding bike, make sure to lean as forward as you can to approximate that riding position. Similarly, if you're on a more upward sitting bike, sit upright. And then spend about 30 seconds in that position and get up, and you'll see that there are imprints in the cardboard. You want to find the deepest points of those imprints. You can do that with a ball bearing that'll just roll down to the bottom of that shape. Or you can just use it with like a piece of chalk to just find out where that deepest point is. So then mark those points, measure between them in millimeters, and then basically add 20 millimeters to that, and that is your optimal saddle width for your riding position. Is a saddle cover just as good as a softer seat? No, it is not. It's not something that I actually recommend for most riding, because saddle covers tend to shift and bunch up and don't necessarily maintain the optimal position on the saddle. So in my opinion, it's always better to just use a saddle or a saddle and riding shorts if you want more cushion. And the problem with seat covers shifting and bunching up like that is that you end up with them cutting off blood flow. So less blood flow means more discomfort and often numbness, so not recommended. Should I get a softer saddle or should I wear padded shorts? It's a great question. And I think it comes down to application and what your preference is and how long you're riding. So for longer rides, especially more athletic rides and more forward riding positions, I generally always recommend cycling shorts. It really helps keep the padding in the right position for your body and optimizes that comfort without cutting off blood flow. And that's the big thing. If you're on the saddle for a long time, especially in a performance application, If you have too much padding, either from the saddle, from a seat cushion, God forbid, or anything like that, or an improperly shaped saddle for your body, cutting off blood flow means much less comfort, often pinching sensation, or even numbness, possible nerve damage. But we won't talk about that. So yeah, for more performance applications, I always recommend shorts or bib shorts, which are shorts that have straps that go over your shoulders, that tend to stay in position a little bit better and be more comfortable. But for more casual applications, when you don't necessarily want to be all geared up in your cycling gear, a softer saddle is great, but generally only for relatively short rides. More cushioned saddles, I think, similarly with what we just described in terms of having an overly padded saddle for performance applications, you can have the same drawbacks for a casual ride. If you're on the bike for a really long time on an overly cushioned saddle, it will just get uncomfortable because of basically enveloping all of your fleshy areas rather than simply supporting you by your sits bones. Do I need a cutout in my saddle? And that's referring to a channel or a cutout here that's designed to relieve pressure in the middle of the saddle, and is usually found on more performance-oriented saddles. And the answer is not necessarily. Not every saddle has a cutout, and not every saddle needs a cutout. It really comes down to personal preference. Me personally, I'm a fan of having a cutout on performance saddles, but I feel like they are totally unnecessary on recreational and casual saddles. Can I move the saddle forward to shorten my reach to the handlebars? I don't recommend doing this. Saddle position fore and aft is an important adjustment to get proper bike fit and proper relationship between your legs and the pedals. You don't really want to adjust the saddle fore and aft to correct a reach position, which is something that has to do with your upper body, because that will actually be a compromise for your optimal position for your legs. So it's my best recommendation to adjust the saddle fore and aft to find the optimal position for your legs and for your reach to the pedals, and then adjust the handlebars to find the most comfortable position for your upper body. So what's the difference between all these different materials? So if we're talking about the saddle rails, then lighter weight is generally more expensive and more performance oriented, just to save weight from the bike. And basically though, if we're talking about comfort, leather is a really cool material for an endurance bike or like a randonneering bike, which is, long distance mixed terrain riding, and could be a great choice for a more casual bike too, if you want to spend more time on it. Leather saddles are known to break into the rider. You can actually condition them like a baseball glove, and they'll actually kind of get softer over time and conform to your body. So they're definitely, on the heavier side, so not always the right choice for a performance bike, but a really cool choice for touring or, more casual riding if you want a more high-end saddle that is also really comfortable. Beyond that, some of the material choice for the cover is really just based on aesthetics. But in terms of what's under the cover, having some gel for a more recreational saddle can add a whole lot of comfort rather than just having simple foam. So when it comes down to it, there are a lot of different options for saddles out there. But if you're looking for the best saddle for you, start by thinking about what your application is, what your distance and riding position are, making sure that you start with a fit first, either a professional fit or checking your sit bone width. And that is a great way to start finding the right saddle. But beyond that, you should be ready to try some stuff out. You might find the right saddle right off the bat, or it might take a long time and a lot of test fitting and playing around with your adjustments until you're totally comfortable. But it's worth it once you get there. If you have any other questions about saddles or anything else bike related, post it in the comments and we'll get to it in a future video. Thanks for watching.